What's the deal with the tanks in Battlefield 5? Now, when I first booted up BF5, I was hoping to get some really interesting World War II vehicle gameplay alongside an improved and innovative infantry system. Now, while I'm not going to talk about the infantry in this game and instead focus on the tanks, I can say that the entire package that Battlefield 5 delivered was underwhelming. Taking the vehicle problem in particular and then focusing on the tanks in Battlefield 5, I can say that there are many things that need to be changed for the next game and possibly even for Battlefield 5 in the near future. An interesting post by Sim Incarnate, a former BF4 competitive player for Team Simthic, discusses some of the problems players face in Battlefield 5 when it comes to taking a tank and actually assisting your team in more than one situation. He is an experienced vehicle player at every level, and it's important to note that having somebody who has that experience can give a more formed opinion for the most part. I've had a lot of experience in tanks in Battlefield 4, more than most, with probably over 1,000 hours playing in them, but it's also important to make sure that you recognise that these people, such as Incarnate, have knowledge that you have to pay attention to. Whilst the skill tree specialization balance is already questionable for firearms, they are especially awful for vehicles, and this is where the main problem lies in Battlefield 5. Whilst the user gets fairly simple customization and upgrade options that appear to make decisions straightforward, they realistically create an illusion of choice, as many options are either less than optimal or even downgrades from the base vehicle. Another issue is that the skill tree will force you down a road, and then when taking that customized tank into battle, you have very little option in doing anything else. Certain specification trees force you to focus on one particular target, meaning you are super effective against one thing, but incredibly vulnerable against another. This might be fine if you like a very potent rock paper scissors approach, but it has a detrimental impact on gameplay, and that can be seen throughout Battlefield 5, and it's one of the main reasons people complain about camping tanks, or tanks that aren't very useful, or tanks that just go blazing on into battle, destroy all the infantry, and then melt the minute they come up against an enemy piece of armour. Let's take a quick look back at Battlefield 4. The tank was good against armour and infantry, whilst even being able to ward off air vehicles. You could choose to operate as a longer range tank with some shells that had less drop, or even a lock-on, or as most competent tankers often settled with, you could pick the trusty AP shell and HMG or LMG loadout. Battlefield 4's options allowed players to specialise in certain roles, without entirely foregoing their ability to participate in others. If the customization in Battlefield 4 had forced you to either choose an anti-infantry or anti-tank loadout, the balance would be instantly thrown up in the air, and that's what's happening in Battlefield 5 right now. Give me a Panzer 38T with the option of having a specification tree that allows me to become a really strong anti-infantry tank with very little anti-armor potential, or allow me to be great against armor but not so good against infantry, or allow me to be pretty good at both but not spectacular. Having a good balance and a lot of choice is really important. This rock paper scissors balance approach is also applied to countering vehicles, leading to equally shallow counterplay. Tank drivers often complain of how toxic facing multiple assault players can be, as all the infantry anti-tank power is concentrated into one class. On the infantry side, facing tanks is also unfun, as not playing assault forces the players to sit there uselessly, or even worse, be farmed by vehicles with zero counter. In no other modern Battlefield title have the interactions between infantry, armour and air been this shallow, and the combined arms premise of the series has been diluted by this. Yes, maybe you could say that it's World War II, and in Battlefield 1 it's World War I, and there's very limited things that DICE can do with the game in terms of anti-tank weaponry, but in doing that you risk going down the avenue of trying to compare and trade off realism with fun, and that's quite dangerous to do. Tanks face no threat from anything but other tanks and planes in Battlefield 5, as the infantry threat can be mitigated by camping, as many tankers often choose to do. Due to tank attrition and limited turret turn rates, tanks are not very incentivized to play aggressively and push objectives with infantry, as they are unable to effectively counter close-range threats. The concept of versatile vehicles with versatile counters is what made Battlefield's gameplay so great in the first place, and it's what got people into playing Battlefield 4 and trying to play in lots of different vehicles or even focusing in just one. For example, in Battlefield 4 you have the attack helicopter, a vehicle that I had lots of time in. It was versatile in what it could engage in and what it could be countered by. Whilst it had the ability to kill everything from infantry to armour to other air vehicles, it was also vulnerable to all these things. Yes, you could argue that on certain maps it was completely overpowered, but that was more of a map design problem than a vehicle problem. Infantry could use lock-on rockets to ward you off, or skilled players could use things like the RPG, straw or tow missiles to kill you with ease. Ground vehicles, especially the Aaa, still posed a threat, and boats were especially versatile in their counters to attack helicopters. Jets were perhaps the biggest threat to an attack helicopter pilot, yet at the same time the attack heli was capable of countering these threats as well, providing an endless loop of counters and counterplay. A skilled pilot with good positioning and movement could engage infantry whilst mitigating the threats posed by rockets and lock-ons, and whilst the Aaa was especially dangerous to pilots, the attack heli's rockets and tow TV combo had a longer range than the Aaa did in most circumstances, allowing for an accurate player and competent heli team to eliminate this threat as well. While the jets were difficult to counter, an accurate attack heli gunner could still stand a fighting chance with the cannons or TV missile. The absence of these endless loops in counterplay is what makes Battlefield 5's vehicle gameplay so shallow. Vehicle spawning, well, this is another problem, and it's fairly simple with what needs to happen. You cannot let players have too much control over what they want to spawn in. What I mean by this is if you are lucky enough in Battlefield 5 to actually take a tank and get one through that buggy little tank spawn indicator, you have so much choice in what you can take. This makes no sense, as you could end up with one team having a few AA tanks and the other consisting of purely long-range anti-tankers. The team with AA vehicles gets smashed and one team gets a huge advantage. Now, one argument is that, oh, the team that took the AA tanks are stupid and deserve to lose all their vehicles, and I get that, sure. If this was a proper 32 versus 32 match of Conquest with everybody tryharding and talking on comms with perfect balance, and one team chooses to take the AA tanks and then they lose out because of that, then fine, that's their fault. But that isn't what Battlefield 5 is, and it never has been. It's a sandbox for everybody to jump online and get some epic kills whilst contributing to a final goal or objective, alongside getting epic plays and doing their own thing. Players need to be pushed in the right direction with their vehicle choices and options, whilst being limited to what they can and can't take. We've seen this in previous Battlefields, Battlefield 3 and 4, whilst sometimes arguably oversaturated with vehicles on certain maps, both did this well and forced players to pick from a limited pool of options. In addition to this, you also had to consider the different options you have with the individual designs when it comes to specializations, which is another layer of choice in Battlefield 5. One Staghound can be specced up to farm infantry, whilst the enemy team could have a Panzer 38T kitted out for farming other tanks, making them very badly balanced against each other. This polar difference in specializations has a negative impact on not only the inevitable tank versus tank battle, but on the infantry that the tanks fight as well. It's not really balanced, even though you'd be forcing players to take a small tank each. It needs a greater mind than mine to come up with a solution to this problem, but for the most part, I think taking a look back to Battlefield 3 and 4, and possibly even Battlefield 1 would be a good idea. I didn't really enjoy BF1 tanking, but at least the tank variant systems were fairly nice, as they eliminated the issue of poor customization options that would in practice limit the player from choosing an ineffective loadout. So what needs to be changed? Whilst I'm not an expert in tank balancing, a reworking of the skill tree specialization system needs to be considered to either increase the diversity and viable loadout choices for vehicle users or eliminate poor loadout choices in general. Battlefield 4's limit to vehicle type per map needs to return, and the changes to tanks and their counters must also be considered. Distributing anti-armor ability across classes so that medics, supports and recons can at least contribute to the anti-armor effort in a minor role would improve the infantry experience. making concessions to realism and reducing the impact of turret turn rate limits or eliminating them entirely, whilst improving tank speed and maneuverability, will reduce the incentive of hill camping as aggressive play will become more viable. More niche vehicles such as AA tanks should have more viability against infantry with concessions. Currently, once an AA tank destroys the enemy planes, it is virtually a wasted vehicle slot for the team. Instead of sitting there with nothing to do, the AA tank should at least be able to contribute in some way to the defensive or offensive efforts of its team, until it becomes time again to counter the air vehicles that might be causing trouble. Perhaps AA tanks can be reworked with mechanics similar to that of stationary AA guns. Stationary AAs receive velocity and drag buffs when fired at high angles against planes, whilst have poorer ballistics at low angles. I'm not sure, there's something they can do to balance this out, but basically what you want to have is an AA tank that is good against planes, and then when there are no planes it can still actually do something and not just be a dead weight to the team. Changes to reduce the over-specialization and return to the versatility that made Battlefield's combined arms experience so great in the first place are so necessary for this game to reach the heights that we saw with Battlefield 3 and 4. What will they do in the next game? I'm not sure, but I'm pretty certain that the choices they've made with the vehicle gameplay in Battlefield 5 aren't really something they should be pursuing for the next game, and they should be looking back to what made Battlefield great in the first place with vehicles and infantry and that all-out war experience, and the key word is versatility. You want to be able to do more than just one thing, because that's why you play Battlefield. It's an all-out war sandbox, and there's so many different things you can do whilst working towards that common goal of capping an objective or arming an MCOM or whatever it may be. Let me know what you think of this video in the comments. It's quite a long one, and I've written a script for this, as you can tell, so it's not just your usual rambling video. There are some pretty comprehensive points in there that I think DICE might want to pay a bit of attention to. Again, thanks goes out to the people that helped me put this video together. You can find links for everything that I use for this video in the description down below. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.